Thank you, Bill. And a word of thanks also for Bill's poem that he sent out by email yesterday and the emails that followed in response. I hope this reflection can be another contribution to that conversation. So let me begin. But first, you must have the quiet. I invite you to enter into 23 seconds of quiet. On the World at 6 news broadcast on CBC Radio last Wednesday, it was reported that the US Fish and Wildlife Service had recommended the removal of 23 bird species from the Endangered Species Act because they are now extinct. 23 bird species. Among them, the ivory-billed woodpecker. Except for recordings, we will never hear the ivory-billed woodpecker's song again. There will only be silence, not quiet, where once there was song. The Washington Post reported, quote, "Even the scientist who wrote the obit cried." This is not an easy thing, said Amy Trahan, the US Fish and Wildlife Service biologist who reviewed the evidence and wrote the report concluding that the ivory bill no longer exists. Nobody wants to be part of that, she added, choking up in a Zoom interview. Just having to write those words was quite difficult. It took me a while, unquote. There will only be silence, not quiet, where once there was song and grief and lament. The text that precedes our gospel reading today is a very long series of instructions by Jesus, who is sending forth his 12 disciples into the world. Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans. Cure the sick, raise the dead. Give without payment. Take no gold or silver, no bag for your journey. Stay with those who are worthy. Shake the dust off your feet when you leave unworthy homes. Beware of the wolves. When persecuted, do not worry about what you speak. Flee if necessary. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. I'm reminded of what I sound like when my son Robin is heading off to school. Are you ready for your math test? Have you got your lunch? Don't forget your Presto card. And to quote my paternal grandmother, and don't stick beans up your nose. After all of Jesus' instructions, we then get assurance. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Being an inquiring mind and on the very slow train to a Master of Theological Studies degree, my question to Jesus at the end of all of that, and in this time in history, would be, but what about the sparrows? And what about the 23 species of birds that are now gone? and the thousands of others of God's creatures that are gone or going? And how is it that I, a member of the human species, that is the cause of this great extinction, the Anthropocene extinction, how is it that I am of more value than many sparrows? And what am I to do? Given that we have only one Earth, fleeing if necessary is not an option, even if I do remember to bring my Presto card. More importantly, what am I to do to respond faithfully to that question in the baptismal covenant we all answer each time we participate in a baptism? Will you strive to safeguard the integrity of God's creation and respect, sustain, and renew the life of the earth? To which we respond, I will, with God's help. There will only be silence, not quiet, where once there was song, and grief, and lament, and so many questions. Today, we mark the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi, and in a short while, Len will be leading us in a blessing of animals. Today, we also mark the end of the season of creation, now observed globally and ecumenically each year. It is a time to both celebrate God's created order and all the creatures in it, and to mourn what we humans are doing to that order. I listen to CBC Radio a lot, and recently on The Current, Canadian climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe said to host Matt Galloway, "As a Christian, I believe that we are to love others and care for others. The poorest 3.5 billion people in the world have contributed about 10% of the heat-trapping gases. It just isn't fair. And so that's why I became a climate scientist. And that's why I care so much." Hayhoe, now living and working in Texas, went on to further draw out the links between poverty, climate change disasters, and God's call to humanity to care for God's creation. This call is echoed in Canada by the members of the ecumenical For the Love of Creation campaign, of which the Anglican Church of Canada and the Primates World Relief and Development Fund, where I work, are members. Over the past year and a half, on behalf of PWRDF, I've been part of the theology working group of the For the Love of Creation campaign. Together, we developed a process and invited into conversation people of faith from across Canada. After the conversations, those who wished were invited to respond to 4 questions addressing themes and theologies related to creation care and justice, sources of lament, fear, and hope, and how we are called to respond to the climate and ecological crises. We then drafted a letter of the faithful that will be publicly presented at a national online symposium at the end of October, just prior to COP26. After describing the sources of our lament, we named some of the sources for our hope. Quote, "Around the world, local ecosystems have been restored and brought back to life. Increased scientific information and activism have resulted in some change. The energetic emergence of youth leadership around climate and earth care is a very powerful source of hope, as are all the grassroots movements worldwide." And then, after identifying how our faith shapes, informs, and moves us, we write in our concluding call, "We must ensure the good of all creation. This means transforming the forces of marginalization by giving special attention to the vulnerability of those most affected by our changing climate, both human and non-human. With this in mind, we, the faithful, involved in the For the Love of Creation campaign call ourselves, our faith and political leaders, and all Canadians of goodwill to personal, collective, and ecological conversion. We must turn away from the forces that threaten our future and turn towards a vision of right relationship where all work together for our common home. This conversion must happen today. This is our lament, our hope, and our call. Now is the time to engage fully in this great work of our time, to become incarnations of hope and allies of all creatures, great and small. May this work move our hearts, strengthen our souls, and move us one step further on the journey, unquote. There will only be silence, not quiet, where once there was song and grief and lament and so many questions, but also hope and faith and discernment towards action with and for this fragile earth, our island home. Allow me to also commend to you the resources that PWRDF is developing for our 3-year education focus titled Creation Care, Climate Action. Each year we're focusing on the intersections between climate action and some of the key work of our partners. This year it is climate action and food security. Next year it will be climate action and women, and in 2023, climate action and health. 5 learning modules are being developed this year that follow both liturgical and agricultural seasons of the year. This week, the 3rd learning module focused on Thanksgiving will appear on our website as soon as I finish writing it. As well, the very Reverend Ken Gray, former Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in Kamloops, worked with us to develop a worship resource for use during the season of creation or at any time in the year. It's also available on the PWRDF website. I'm going to share my screen once more. Before I end, one more short story. I live with Robin, and since the pandemic began, I also work in a small apartment in the Kensington Market neighborhood downtown. In the early days of the pandemic, when the city was under lockdown, in the quiet, and under the clear blue sky of an early morning, a falcon appeared on a tree in our courtyard, right in front of our balcony. The falcon perched there for a good few minutes, looking at us, looking for squirrels perhaps, and then quietly flew away. But first, you must have the quiet. We began with Wendell Berry. Let us end with the words of poet Mary Oliver, and then 23 more seconds of quiet, and then another robin song. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over. announcing your place in the family of things. Amen.